Welcome to the Watchful Citizen. We're sponsored by the Lancaster County Democrats. My name is Barbara Byer, and today I'll be conducting an interview with Don Mayhew, who I happen to serve with on the school board here in Lincoln, but he is running for the state legislature for LD 29. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you again. So why don't we just launch into this? What is motivating you to run for the state legislature?
Well, Barb, there are a lot of issues that are important to me, but the biggest thing that was the tipping point in this decision for me was what happened to Lincoln Public Schools via the state aid formula last year. As you know, Lincoln Public Schools is a growing district. Last year we grew by some 900 kids, and as we've talked about, that's like saying that Lincoln grew by a wahoo last year. And then the year before we did the same thing. So for the last several years, Lincoln has been growing at an incredible rate. And then during that time, our biggest source of revenue, which is property taxes, valuations for property has been relatively flat. It dipped, and then it started working its way back up to where it was about 3 years ago. So according to the state aid formula, the way it works is they take our needs, which is our number of kids, and we're growing and growing and growing, and then they look at our resources, which is the property taxes, which have been relatively flat, and the difference of that is the need that the state aid formula is supposed to address. And with the way that LPS has been growing, the state aid formula last year called for a significant loss in millions of dollars of state aid. So to me, that means the state aid formula is broken, and I want to put myself in a position to fix it.
Well, I appreciate that you would do that, Don. It is a serious issue for all the different urban school districts across the state. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, if I'm going to talk about my life, the most important place to start is my family. I have a lovely wife, and she's here with me today watching this interview, and she's been very supportive through this campaign and through my past campaigns. I think she would say that she's my biggest fan, and I know that I would say that I'm her biggest fan.
Cool.
We have 3 children. Our 2 oldest kids have graduated from Lincoln Public Schools, and our youngest is a sophomore at Lincoln Southwest. I am a techie by trade and by personality. Right now I work as a database administrator for National Research Corporation here in town. Before that, I was a consultant for several years, traveling from company to company for short periods of time, solving problems. And that was a very valuable experience for me, not only as a techie, where I got to work with different technologies and meet a lot of different people, but also I was a business owner during that time, and I had a couple of people working for me. So there were a lot of very valuable things that I gained from that experience. And also, as you know, I've served for almost 11 years on the Lincoln School Board. That is service that I have very much enjoyed. I like the issues, I like working with the people, but it has gotten to a point where I feel that I need to bump up a level of service to try to put myself in a position to have a greater impact on kids and families, and that's, again, why I'm running for the legislature.
Excellent. So what are your 3 main campaign issues?
Well, in the interest of limited time, I would like to talk a little bit about one thing that is very important to me.
Sure.
And that's obviously education.
Okay.
Education has a huge effect on our community. Education is an economic driver. Real estate agents talk about the schools when they are selling homes. Companies look at the strength of the education system so that because they're looking for a well-educated workforce to hire from. Families look at the schools when they're making the decision whether they want to move here or stay here. Tom Brokaw described education as the currency of the 21st century. And as we continue to move from a manufacturing-based economy to an information-based economy, I think that is very true. Education, in a world of haves and have-nots, education is an equalizer. Education is an antidote for poverty. Education is a message to our children that no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like, no matter how much money you have, no matter the color of your skin, if you work hard enough and you dream big enough, you can make your life into anything you want it to be, and that's a good message for our kids. Education is a bridge from dreams to opportunities. Investments in education are a direct investment in our community. I think that education is a very powerful ally on the war on ignorance. And so this, for me, is a very defining issue.
Well, very good. So, what do you think are some of the largest concerns among the constituents in LD 29?
Well, I think that there are several issues that are always going to be important. Education, the economy, jobs, child welfare is in the news right now. But I think that one of the biggest things that I'm hearing is a concern about a working government. I recently took a trip to Washington, D.C. as part of the Federal Relations Network, and that was over 700 school board members from across the country that all went to Washington, D.C., got briefed on issues that are important to educators, and then spent time talking to our state representatives about those issues. One of the things that we talked about the most was the importance of reauthorizing what's called ESEA, which otherwise known as No Child Left Behind. It was supposed to be reauthorized back in 2008. It hasn't happened yet, and so this is a huge issue for educators, getting this law fixed and then reauthorized. And as we went around talking to our state representatives, it became clear that there was just no way that this very important thing was going to happen. And the reason for that is simply partisan gridlock. Nobody can work with anybody from the other side of the aisle. Nobody can admit mistakes. Nobody can sign on to anything that gives somebody else credit or makes somebody else look good. And the result is just gridlock. Nothing can get done. We had a speaker that came to one of our sessions that described this Congress in terms of setting some type of a record where they had only passed some 60 bills, and most of those were renaming post offices or continuing resolutions.
Wow.
So I think that the art of compromise has just been completely lost. And as you know from our work on the school board, it doesn't really matter what party people are from. We have a lot of dedicated people who are just working hard to try to find solutions to big problems. And I would like to take that experience, that art of compromise, and to be that voice of reason. I would like to take that experience to the legislature.
It's very needed. That is so true. So you did mention child welfare and education issues, and those are critical issues in our state right now. There's a lot of reorganization going on with child welfare. Could you tell us some of your thoughts on that?
Well, child welfare obviously needs some work right now, and I think that one of the biggest things that's going to come out of this is a very big conversation on the role of privatization in the government. This isn't the first time that's happened, but I think that this is the first time that it has had the focus that it has right now. As far as education goes, I think that funding is always going to be an issue. And I've been doing some research on this. And what I have found is that if you compare the rest of the states, Nebraska is below average in terms of dollars spent on education. But if you look at dollars spent in terms of per capita or as a percentage of the GSP, we are actually above average. And what that tells me is that we don't have a lot of the population base, the tourism, some of these things that generate revenue that a lot of other states enjoy. And so I think the challenge for our elected leaders that is coming is that we are going to need to look for creative new ways to fund education. And I think the place we start is we look at things that other states are doing, things that are working in those other states, and look for ways to model those things here in Nebraska.
Okay. What do you think are some of Nebraska's most pressing economic issues?
Very simply, I think that we need to make Nebraska an inviting place for both businesses and for families. I talked about broadening the tax base, and I think the best way we do that is by having companies and families here.
Okay, okay. So what do you hope to accomplish as a senator in our Utica role?
Well, obviously education is a huge issue for me, and I want to position myself as the education senator. As I mentioned, I do want to be a voice of reason, a voice of compromise, and I just want to bring my years of experience with effective government to the legislature.
Okay, well, good. And what makes you different from the other candidates in this race? We have two other Democrats, which of course we're going to interview them, so watch for the shows. But what is different between you and the other candidates?
Well, I have a track record as an elected official, and that's something that people will be able to look at and decide if that's the kind of leadership that they want in the legislature. I have years of experience with effective government, have a track record of working with very ideologically diverse people to solve big problems. I have a record of protecting services that we provide as a school district, and I have a very strong record of financial prudence, fiscal prudence. I'm very, very proud to run on my record with Lincoln Public Schools, where in my time on the school board, graduation rates have increased, achievement has increased, test scores have gone up, and in that time right now the overall property tax levy is the lowest it's been in 40 years. And so I think that that's the kind of leadership, I hope that that's the kind of leadership that people will find attractive and will want to see serving them in the legislature.
So you have some experience running campaigns. So what kind of campaign are you going to run this time?
I'm going to run a very inclusive campaign. One of the things that I have done in putting together this campaign is looking for people, again, from across the aisle. My campaign committee is Keith Prettyman, who has formerly served on the school board, Lanny Boswell, a member of LEBA, Pat Beans is the CFO for National Research. So I've got several very notable Republicans, and I've got Democrats as well. John Carlson on the Planning Commission, Julie Latimer, who used to run the Holiday Parade and is now marketing director at South Point, and my treasurer is Doug Gans. And so one of the themes of my campaign is being able to reach across the aisle, again, to work with different people and try to have some effective bipartisanship. And I think that one of the indicators that right now I'm the most proud of is the fact that I've gotten a couple of early endorsements, one from Mayor Beitler and one from Joe Hampton. You know, two people, again, who are very ideologically diverse, but they're both supportive of my campaign.
Excellent, excellent. So do you plan on going door to door or using TV or radio or?
I do plan on doing all of those things. I am very fascinated with social media. I've been working with that quite a bit. I have a Twitter account where I have started recently tweeting school board meetings live. People can follow me at Don Mayhew. I also have a website, donmayhew.com, and I've recently started a blog as well to talk about some educational and campaign issues, and that's at tumblr.donmayhew.com. But I think that the success of my campaign, just as my past school board campaigns, it's going to be based on my ability to reach people, and that means door to door. So I'm going to be walking and talking with as many people as I can.
Great. So are you worried? I mean, I hear this so much in the media these days about big money and campaigns. Are you worried about big money?
Well, I think it's always possible that that could be a factor. I'm not really worried about it. I'm just concentrating on my race. And you know, I'm spending a lot of time, I'm getting a lot of support, and I just know that nobody in this race right now is going to outwork me. So I'm working hard.
Good. Well, I want to go and tell everyone that right now we're interviewing Don Mayhew. He is the candidate, Democratic candidate, one of three, for LD 29 for the state legislature. And so how can our viewers get involved with your campaign?
Well, I think the best way to get started is if people were to go out to my website at donmayhew.com, and there is a form there for folks to fill out, to make contact with the campaign, to offer help in a variety of ways, and that's a great way to get in touch with me.
Good. So what kinds of activities would the volunteers be able to do?
One thing that I was surprised about in the race for the legislature was how much more money it costs than it does for a school board campaign.
Yeah.
And so fundraising is a huge part of this campaign for me. And so donations are always welcome, and it doesn't have to be $500 or $1,000. $10, $25 is very helpful. So fundraising is very important. Also, as I mentioned, I'm going to be making as much personal contact with voters in my district as possible, but following that up with volunteers also walking in my precincts is going to be very big. I've already got several people who have volunteered to spend a Saturday or a Sunday walking door to door on my behalf and talking with people, and that's something where I could always use more help.
Well, good, good. Well, let's go and back up a little bit. You are very passionate about education. Can you tell us a little more clearly what has happened in the last few years with state aid?
Well, I think what happened was state aid had started to drop off several years ago, and then it was being bolstered by the ARA funds, the stimulus money.
Oh, okay, sure.
Which was coming into state aid, and the states were using that money to bolster up the state aid money. And then as something that we had been working on and planning for several years, we'd been describing as the cliff effect, that stimulus money went away, and then suddenly there was a shortfall. And I think that what happened was that senators went into the state aid formula and they tried to make last-minute adjustments to the formula to make allowances for that loss in stimulus money, and they made some changes that had some very unintended effects for some districts like Lincoln. I think that is the main reason that we lost so much state aid last year.
So a lot of the bigger districts, and by that we mean like Kearney, Norfolk, Grand Island, Lincoln, of course, Scotts Bluff, what we all have in common is that we have a lot of English language learners, we have higher poverty rates, and generally we're growing school districts. Yet all of those school districts experience a decrease in state aid, significant decrease in the millions for many of the districts. Yet some small districts that are shrinking in size actually experience an increase in their state aid.
Well, and again, that's another indicator of just the dysfunction of the state aid formula right now. You have districts out there who have been flat or who have shrunk in terms of student population, and yet their state aid stayed the same or even grew. And these are districts that are levying well under the $1.05 maximum, and their per student spending is much higher than ours. In the 250-some districts in Nebraska, only 22 districts spend less per student than Lincoln does. We have one of the lowest per student spending averages in the state. Even Omaha, which is bigger and has the greater economy of scale, they spend more per student than we do. So we're very efficient. We manage our money very well. And yet again, with all the growth that we've had, we just had this huge loss. And so it's something that needs to be fixed.
So how does that impact classroom size when we have these decreases in state aid?
Well, anytime that you have a decrease in state aid in a school district in general, that's going to have an effect on staff. In Lincoln, for Lincoln Public Schools, staff is almost 90% of our budget. So when we take a huge hit to our budget like that, it has an effect on people. Now in Lincoln, especially in my time on the board, we have always prioritized cuts to be made as far away from the classroom as possible. So we've tried to preserve classrooms, we've tried to preserve class sizes, but then one of the side effects is that we start losing support personnel, and those are people who provide important support to our teachers. So it does have, despite our best efforts, it does have an effect on the classroom.
Yeah, it can be pretty negative. So other issues on the state level, I know that growing the economy is huge. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, I do, and I hate to sound like a one-note person, but
Sure.
Again, I think that education is one of the best ways to try to address some of these things. When you talk about, as I mentioned before, moving from a manufacturing-based economy into an information-based economy, we need workers to be able to keep up, to be able to transition into using technology, and to where the things that we make end up being less important than the information that we manage. And so being able to give workers the skills that they need to transition into these technology, typically higher paying jobs, I think is important. But then also being able to give children, as they grow into adults, the skills that they need to get good jobs, and the better educated they are to get higher paying jobs. Once again, I think that investing in education has such a huge effect on our community in general.
It does. It really does. So do you have any ideas for advancing employment initiatives on the state level? I know that we're really blessed here in Nebraska that as the economic downturn happened, it did impact us, but we retained pretty good employment rates during that time. But I think that's still a concern for a lot of people. Do you have any thoughts on increasing employment?
Well, we do have very low unemployment, and I think that that's a very good thing. That's a strong economic indicator for our state. But I do think that we also suffer from some underemployment. where we have folks who are working at jobs where maybe they have a higher skill set than would be needed for that particular job. As I talked about before, I think it's important that in Nebraska we have an environment that is friendly to businesses, attracting those businesses. The work that's happening right now on the bill to bring the data centers to Nebraska, I think is very positive. But then again, making sure that people have the skills to be able to work at some of these higher tech jobs, I think is very important.
You know, when you talk about the skill set and being able to work at these jobs, then we have the opposite thing happening, and I hear people talk about the brain drain. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, again, I think that in trying to make Nebraska, you know, an inviting place, we have to consider both sides. It's not just companies, it's also families. And I do think that that's an issue where folks, they do come here for an education and then they leave, go somewhere else to get a job. And so we need to be sure that there are jobs here for those people, but also that Lincoln and Nebraska are places that people want to live. So places that are friendly to families, places where there are, you know, things to do, where there's culture, art, music, and again, a strong education system so that families want to move their children here.
Yeah, that's so true. And we see a lot of activity here in Lincoln on the cultural scene and all the redevelopment efforts that I think will really pay off on that issue.
I agree.
And then I'm going to go one more time back to child welfare, and Senator Kathy Campbell's been working on this issue. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I don't want to comment specifically on what Kathy's doing right now, but I will
Sure.
speak again about the role of privatization in government.
Okay.
I do think that that's going to be a big issue for us on this particular topic, and it's something that we've had experience with in the school district as well. And I think one of the concerns is that when you provide a service that people depend on, and then you privatize that service, and then you have a situation like what just happened with the company from Omaha that decided they couldn't make a profit anymore. They pulled out. They stopped offering that service. And now the state has to step in, hire a bunch of people, and suddenly pick up this service that people depend on. We had, not so dire, but a similar situation in Lincoln Public Schools several years ago where we were working with privatizing janitorial services. And of course, there were all sorts of concerns because there are going to be people that are in our buildings with our children. We want to make sure that the private employer is doing the appropriate background checks and that we're getting high-quality, solid people to be in these buildings with our children. And so we went through that. We offered it out. We had people working on a contract to provide janitorial services for us. They got to a point in the middle of the year where they decided they couldn't make a profit and they canceled the contract. They just stopped. Now, of course, we always have the option of trying to pursue, you know, some kind of legal recourse. That's not something we wanted to do. We just wanted our schools to be clean. So we ended up having to pick that service up ourselves. Another example of that was when we were looking at transportation. And you know, we have a lot of buses, we have a lot of kids that need to be moved around to different school buildings, and twice in my time on the school board we have done RFPs, or requests for proposals, for private companies to offer that transportation. And what we found in both of those processes was that nobody could do it less expensively than we could. And intuitively, I think that makes sense, because in order for a business to provide a service less expensively than government, you'd have to believe that government is so wildly inefficient that the business can do it less expensively and build a profit on top of it. And so I think that that's something that in a lot of cases is very difficult to do. What I think is a very appropriate use of privatization is for specific skill sets or for specific needs. For example, if we need a certain website set up, we don't want to go out and hire a bunch of web people. We may just hire a company to do that. So again, I think that this is a very interesting conversation, and I think what's happening right now with child welfare is going to be a catalyst to having that bigger conversation.
Excellent. Well, I really wish you a lot of luck with your campaign, Don. This has been a great interview. I want to go and encourage our viewers to come to Democratic Party meetings the third Tuesday of every month down at the Communication Workers Union Hall at about, I'd say about 22nd and N Streets is close to Elliott School. Those meetings are at 7 p.m. and you get to meet great candidates like Don Mayhew and some of the other people that are running for offices this year. You can get involved, you can volunteer, you can learn more about the issues, and we would be happy to see you. Thanks for watching, and remember, vote.
Under